Well, you're saying that the water is crisp and fresh and beautiful, and everybody says that. It goes through a thick bed of granite. What makes it different from the other guys' water? Is water that important?
The water itself is not as important necessarily as the geology and the distance that it runs. The GlenGrant, the stream has an origin. The top of it's a small stream. It's not off the river, and it does have a little bit of the granite in the top, but most of it comes through the harder schists that run down. It's not filtered through limestones or anything like this. It just comes down over rock that is fast flowing, and it doesn't pick up a lot of minerals as it comes down.
Okay.
So it's also, as a result, the water becomes quite soft, and so that is very good for making whiskey to start with. Most of the whiskies in that area, the water is very much the same. I mean, it's not a big point of differentiation. And the water has to be very cold. That's why most distilleries don't produce during July or August, which is called the silent season, because the water's too warm. And you need the cold water for the condensing. And 90% of the water is used in the condensing rather than the making.
Right.
But it's all part of the process. You change a little bit, you may change the nature of this whiskey in particular, but the water is special genetically for Scotch whiskey rather than genetically for this.
Well, then is there anything that is specific to GlenGrant when it comes to the mashing or the fermentation? Is there a very long fermentation? Is there a very quick fermentation?
The fermentation is reasonably quick. I suppose the point of differentiation comes from the shape of the stills. They're very, very tall and very thin and narrow as they go up. And as a result, that leads to quite a quick distillation process. And that itself turns into a lighter spirit.
Right.
And that lighter spirit then plays with the bourbon oak.
All right, so this is mostly ex-bourbon barrels?
It's all ex-bourbon barrels.
All ex-bourbon barrels.
Yeah, so that gives you that little bit of that toffiness that you're getting through there, that little carameliness. And that is because the light spirit will dance more with the wood than a heavier spirit who just sort of, I guess it's sort of how you see it in your mind's eye, but a lighter spirit has more interaction with the wood, and so it plays around with the wood, which means you don't have to mature it for as long as some of the heavier whiskies that need maybe a longer distillation in order to play and work with that wood. So.
Should I just guess that the barrels come from wild turkey, or is it not that simple?
It's not that simple.
Okay.
I'm sure some of them do. It would make sense, but yeah, they'll come from whatever source that is required of them. Yeah.
But we're talking about standard size bourbon barrels.
Yeah, standard size bourbon barrels. Yeah.
We are not looking for any specific wood finish. You know, this is the trend.
GlenGrant has not gone down the road of wood finishing in terms of its range. Again, perhaps because it hasn't sort of stepped out of the limelight. You know, it hasn't become a whiskey that you see. Some of the more well-known brands, in order to keep their custom base happy, they have to bring out different expressions so that the novelty factor remains. When you're a smaller player, you yourself are the novelty factor to a certain extent.
Well, then, what will we find in the GlenGrant 16 years old?
To me, when I do it, I find in terms of the flavouring, there's a role reversal. So you had your apples and your pears perhaps in the palate and a nuttier end to it. I find you get more of the nuttiness in the palate and the fruits towards the end.
Well, let's check this out.
Why not? So a little bit longer in the barrel, 16 years.
Right.
Look at this, I'm even opening it up here.
Well, but then you say 16. Is it just 16, or is it when they make the blend over there? It is a single malt Scotch, but a few barrels are put together. We're not talking about a single barrel.
It's not a single barrel,
so
no.
is I guess the minimum is 16 years of age, of course, but is there something that's 25-year-old? Is something that's 18-year-old?
No, these are all 16-year-olds.
They're all 16?
They're all 16-year-olds, yeah.
Lovely sound.
I love that the virgin moment when you first pour, that noise that you get.
You.
And the one thing about the ages, though, is it's not so much to get hung up about the age of a whiskey as the maturity of the whiskey. It's up to the master distiller to decide where a certain volume, will meet a certain quality, will meet a certain price range that will meet the market. So most of the sort of whiskies that you find at a certain price range will come in that 10 to 12 bracket, because that's the sweet spot for that. When you're a little bit older than that, the wood begins to influence it more, and you do get a curve whereby as past a certain age, the wood will affect the whiskey too much, and you have to be careful of that. If you have a whiskey which is maturing quickly, you don't want it to go on and on and on, whereas a slower maturing whiskey needs that length of time to reach the same level. But when you're comparing a 10 and a 16 within the same family, then you have certainly up to certainly to 16 years, you are upping the more mellow nature of the whiskey. It's less, even though the 10 isn't exactly fiery, but you're still mellowing it out. You're getting deeper colours and you're getting deeper notes to what you got before. It's just that you've added an extra trombone to the orchestra. You've added just a little bit more that's in there. And probably with this, you may want to add a little bit of water just to start releasing some of those flavours. Right. It's again entirely up to the whiskey level.
Certainly a depth on the nose.
Yeah, a greater depth.
You didn't have on the 10.
You have it's been in the barrel 80% longer, so it's bringing up that extra notes out of it. And you're getting more of that toffiness and vanilliness when you're breathing it with the mouth open again. So on your palate, even though you're not tasting it, you're still...
It smells like I should taste it.
Yeah, I think you should be on cue with that. Slange.
Creamy mouthfeel.
Yeah. Full.
A hint of spiciness that you may not have had with the...
That's right. With that correct? Yep, I get that. And that lingers on the front of your tongue.
Oh yeah, that's...
But now it evolves, to me, into that fruitiness. So that creamy vanilliness, that almost toffee nuttiness is what invades the mouth. And then as it dies away, that fruitiness that was in the 10, which lingered, to me carries on in the palate. So you get I think it's an extraordinary whiskey for 16 years.
Again, I'll be asking you that question about the retail price.
This will come in at nearer the 110 mark in dollar mark.
All right.
Yeah.
It's quite rich of a nose for being only ex-bourbon barrels.
Yeah.
You've got those nutty notes that you usually find maybe more on a different kind of oak species, on something that would be more like
a Spanish oak. You're getting that. I think just it's the sheer length of time that it's in. I mean, you would never really keep a bourbon in its own barrel for that length of time anyway. Most bourbons would be well out of the barrel long before 16 years. And it depends again on the barrels that they decide at a higher level, what depth of charring they're using, which bourbon has been in there. If it's deep within the oak when you bring this in, that more lively spirit will find that bourbon and pull it out. Rather than being its own master that just happens to be absorbing by osmosis. It's actually, I think, actively, in my mind, I see it actively seeking out the flavours.
Tricky question for you. So this 50 or so year old GlenGrant that I find in an airport duty free store, I will not reveal here so that not everybody goes and buy the last bottle. GlenGrant from the 60s, still rich and fruity.
Yeah.
Bottled over 50 years after being distilled.
Yeah.
Would that still be possible today? Or was distillation different back then, that it would allow for such a longer maturation? Or was just the barrel so neutral?
I think the work to produce what you're tasting has happened in the barrel. It's been, it's spent 48 hours going through the distillation process, and it's spent over 50 years in a barrel. That's where the real work happens. And also, because you're losing 2% out of the barrel every single year through the angel share, the level in the barrel would have been down to, it would have been a small amount left in the bottom of the barrel. By 75 years, you've nothing left. And that makes it such a hit and miss. They could have poured that out of the barrel, and it could have been like bitumen. It really could have just been like chewing on a bark. But if you get, as you say, a nice neutral barrel that has not, it's not offering up its flavours so much that it keeps a lot of it within itself, then it's going to mature really nice and well. But you then have to, for a lot of whiskies that are going to be that age, you've got to look at the price point. People don't buy 56-year-old bottles of whiskey and drink them generally. They usually sit on a shelf. Now, to me,
what a shame.
I know.
You've got to drink it.
Whiskey was not designed to be a decoration. Because the consumer is much more aware of the differences, they're much more aware of the different expressions, the different ages, and what the whiskey can provide them, that the producers have to be clever with that as well. You also have to remember that this one here, the 16-year-old, was bottled 16 years, or was 16 years in the barrel before it was bottled, which means that when it was being distilled, you have to imagine your market 16 years down the line. And I think that the amount of people now who drink malt whiskey, the rise in it, the almost exponential rise in people drinking it and understanding it and getting more to it, as opposed to what was happening in the 1960s, where they were much more novelty factor whiskies. They were probably, a lot of these older whiskies were given as presents to retired distillmen and so on. That said, though, in terms of the mechanical process of the distillation, nothing has changed. It's still the same set of stills. The water still comes from the same place. There may be differences in the barley. There's certainly differences in the wood. But it may well be down to the skill of who was ever the master distiller at the time. The current master distiller has been there a good number of years, and a lot of it tends to be family traditional as well in these parts of the world.
So if grandpa, dad and son want to go and visit, can they?
You can visit, yeah. There's the distillery has a visitor centre, which is housed in one of the old brick buildings, and you get shown around and taken through the process, but it also has a lovely set of gardens as well. The Major Grant, who designed the shape of the long stills, he was a very avid gardener, and around the back of the distillery where the river flows through it, it's one of the most beautiful planned and created gardens in that part of Speyside.
So you're saying don't just come alone, bring the wife or the girl.
Bring the wife. She can sit up in the garden. That's terrible. Once they've had their tour and their dram, because this is a nice, easy drinking dram, they can take.
And I suggest we get another bit of that. Well, David, thank you very much.
No problem, Florian. Thank you very much.
And Slange for us?
Slange Could drink that all night.